Hello! I'm Elaine, and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter. I do ghost tours. And I am not going to tell you the stories that I tell on my tour, because you gotta pay for those. But if you want to hear some interesting things that have happened to me while I'm leading random drunk people around the French Quarter, I got you. So the thing about New Orleans is there are going to be kids around. New Orleans is a very popular tourist attraction. There are a lot of things to do with kids, like the zoo, the aquarium, the steamboat. Hell, you can get a package deal to go from the aquarium to the zoo on the steamboat. It costs a lot, but it's cool. There are museums. There are all sorts of things. But that's not the things you're always going to see kids at. To put it bluntly, you will see kids on Bourbon Street after midnight. And that always really bothers me. Like, you shouldn't be bringing your babies there. But at the same time, not my problem. What is my problem is when people try to bring their kids on our adults-only tours. Now, there are obvious reasons our adults-only tours are adults-only. They've got adult material. We're talking about gruesome stuff. We're talking about violence. We're talking about sex workers on the Bad Bitches tour a lot. There's usually cussing. There are usually a lot of drunk people around. And frankly, the material is just not suitable. But that's not the main reason they're adults only. They're adults only because everybody else on the tour wants it to be adults only. People sign up for these tours specifically so that they don't have an angry child standing next to them, or for that matter, an awkward teenager asking weird questions. But that does not prevent parents from trying to bring their kids on our adults only tour. Now, weirdly, I will weirdly tolerate them on the Killers and Thrillers, the violence and death tour, as long as they're at least old enough that they could possibly pass for 14. I'll just sort of ignore it and move on, even though the minimal age is 16. But on the Bad Bitches, I'm just not comfortable. Like, I'm a fully sex-positive person. It's important to teach your kids about sex. It is not the correct way to teach your kid about sex to bring them on a tour that talks about violence against sex workers. So, needless to say, I don't like it when people try to bring their kids on Bad Bitches. And that means I will usually ask them to leave. And parents don't always like that. And annoyingly, the office does not always back me up. Sometimes they'll be like, well, can't you just let it slide? But I have two stories about parents bringing their kids on Bad Bitches that really stands out. One was relatively recently. I had a family come on my tour, and these kids were not even, like, could pass for teenagers. One was probably about 12, one was probably about 10, and one looked to be about 7 or 8. And so when they walk up, I'm like, I'm sorry, you can't be on this tour. This is adults only. And the mom was like, but I thought it was like PG-13, that as long as the parents gave permission, it will be fine. And I explained that, no, this is really adult material. There's going to be some cussing. There are some drunken bachelorette parties as part of the rest of the group. And more importantly, this is not so much about your kids. It's about everybody else in the group. And it's about my comfort level talking to kids about this. And she was like, oh. And she got a little bit annoyed, but when I was like, you can reschedule for the family friendly, she took that option and called and rescheduled, which was great. Except the next day, I was the tour guide on the family friendly. So I went in waiting for her to be mad at me, and I actually left that tour with a few more details in it that I usually cut for kids that young. But I figured, hell, they wanted the adults only. They wanted something more than just and then bad things happened here. But about halfway through that tour, the mom came up to me and was like, I'd like to thank you for not letting us go on the adults only, because this has been too much for my kids. And I'm like, we haven't even gotten to the Lalaurie Mansion. Like, oh my God. But that's not the worst adventure I ever had on that tour with kids. There was one night I was dividing a tour with another group, because if you do not know, New Orleans has a limit of 28 guests per tour. So if you have more than 28 people signed up for a night, quite often the companies will deal with this by having 2 tour guides and letting the tour guides divide the people in half. And that makes it really difficult when you have the exact right number, and therefore the numbers have to be right on who's going with which tour. And that particular night, I was even more stressed out because the tour guide I was dividing with, I knew was always late. She had another job that she had to do before this one, so usually she was rocking up like right as the tour started. So I'm trying to sign in 56 people on a narrow sidewalk, and I see this family coming down the street, and from a block away, I can tell they're going to be trouble. First of all, they're walking in the middle of the street, even though there's literally cars honking at them to get out of the way. Mom is wearing beautiful 4-inch tall stiletto heels, and the kid, like, if he was 14, like, that's the eldest he could possibly be. And so when Dad comes up and signs in, I'm like, okay, but just so you know, this is an adults only tour. Your son's not gonna be able to come on this. And he was like, what do you mean? I'm like, adults only. 16 and up is, like, 16 is the youngest we can take. And he was like, well, he's 16. Meanwhile, the kid is shooting me looks that clearly say, no, I'm not. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess so, but I'm not going to ID him, so I guess I'm going to have to take your word for it. And I give them the normal spiel of, like, there is no bathroom break, go now. And I go to sign in other guests. Meanwhile, behind me, I hear Mom start screaming at the dad about, wait, is this a walking tour? And she starts screaming at him about, like, you always do this. You always sign us up for things that I can't do. I'm dressed beautifully, and you took me to a cheap cafe for dinner. And now this tour guide is saying we can't even come because this is a family friend. This is an adults only thing. And how dare you make me walk? And son comes over and talks to me and is like, I'm so sorry for my parents. And I'm like, it's okay, kid. It's not your fault. But eventually, a few moments later, Dad comes over and is like, so we're going to have to bow out because my wife is sick. And I'm like, sure, that's the reason, whatever, as long as it gets you out of my hair. And he's like, I need my money back. And I'm like, well, A, tour guides don't handle that. You will need to call the office. But also, just to warn you, we don't do refunds. You can reschedule for another night or another city or anything like that, but I can't offer you a refund. And God bless the boy, he steps off to the side and calls the office. And I can hear him while I'm starting my tour shouting into the phone, well, the tour guide told us we can get our money back. And I'm like, no, it didn't. But I think at least that's the end of it. Except no. The next day I get a call from the office reprimanding me for telling this guy that he would get a refund. And I'm sitting here like, I did not. I told him he directly was not going to get a refund. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.